We're raising a generation of young people who are very observant, but they're not religious.
I always think like davening for me, for boys, I always like equate it to tznius for girls. It's like the topic that somehow we cannot get right in the chinuch system, and somehow we do more damage than good.
Most of the teenage bachim are in the back schmoozing. And his assumption is, had their fathers have been there, they would not be. Welcome to the Learning Curve podcast, brought to you by Mishpacha magazine.
We are raising children in a changing and challenging world.
So let's tackle the important issues facing from families today.
I am Rabbi Garfield, Menal of Yeshiva Teres Emes in Houston, and I love talking about chinuch.
I am Rabbi Schonfeld, Menahel Yeshiva Katana of Manhattan, Beis Tipra of Manhattan, and director of Camp Aish. I also love talking chinuch and sometimes fishing.
Join us as we answer your questions and discuss the topics that matter to parents the most.
And Bruchim Abayim, welcome back to another episode of The Learning Curve. As we continue to discuss the important matters of chinuch, as we continue to hear from the parents, our previous episode about anxiety was well received, definitely in my family. But the yeshiva is winding down, which means everyone is so calm as graduations are starting to perk up, end-of-year celebrations, and us Menalim, Rabbi, are like, what do we do with ourselves? It's so,
Yeah.
we're going to be so sad.
Yes. And also we have to plan next year while that's all going on. So it's like, funny to do. But Baruch Hashem, fear not, in the summer, some of us find some fun, engaging activities to do. What do you do, Rabbi Schonfeld, in the summer?
Someone, I'm looking for a division head, because Baruch Hashem, a couple of my divisions are getting married.
Wow.
So someone says to me, hey, wouldn't Rabbi Garfield be great? Why don't you?
I'm already married, though.
So, first of all, I can't imagine your wife would want to come to camp. She'd probably stay in Houston. And second of all, I said, have you listened to any of our podcasts? He doesn't know camp. He doesn't do camp. He doesn't like camp. He's against camp. Especially because of the fact that we don't have kids, we don't give kids cell phones to call home every day.
Yeah, that I'm against. I'm against camps that don't let kids call home, like similar to the prison in El Salvador.
Or Alcatraz.
Other than that, I'm not against
but we should maybe send our avid listeners, now that Baruch Hashem, our reach in season 2 has more than doubled season 1, that toward the end of season 1, and one of those episodes, maybe in episode 4, actually, I'm trying to remember, I don't remember exactly, we spoke camps with Rabbi Kasus and Mr. Selengut, so really go back into the archives, and you could listen to an enjoyable camp episode. Back when we were young.
Oh yeah, inexperienced. Now we're experts.
All right, here we go, Rabbi.
Well, let's get some questions going. I'm going to ask you the first question, and let's get into it. Here we go. Are schools challenging gifted students enough, or are they being left to coast? My son is always bored. Should I be stepping in, or is this something the school should deal with? Who's responsible for keeping bright kids engaged and helping them thrive?
So, who's responsible for keeping bright kids engaged and helping them thrive? In a school setting, the school. At the home setting, the parents. In other words, it's almost unfair to ask me this question because of the size of my yeshiva. In other words, I understand and recognize that if you are a yeshiva with a very large student body, and
like in Houston, like a school in Houston.
Yes. With 26, 28, or as we heard about Darche, up to 33 kids in a class, right?
Scandalous.
6 parallels. This becomes challenging. It's just harder. It's just much harder. I like to tell, when parents come for interviews in Yeshiva Time Manhattan, I tell them that my hashkafa about education is that, of course, you teach to the middle. Right, the Rebbe's job is to teach to the majority, just to and a bell curve. Whoever the middle is, the general standard of the class, and it changes year to year. That's where Rebbe teaches. You teach to the middle. You support the bottom. I'm talking academically. You support the bottom, and you try to incentivize. And I don't mean incentivize with prizes, right? But you try to enrich the top. And in our yeshiva, when we have 15 kids in the class, that is attainable, and Baruch Hashem, I think we do a decent job. We have separate tracks for math, even though we have in the older grades, even though we have 15 kids, right? So that's a tremendous bracha. We pull out for different times. We'll have chaburas, voluntary chaburas in the morning for certain grades at certain times. So I do think that part of this challenge is the size of the school, and that's 90% of Klal Yisrael's yeshivas. So I'm in a little bit of an advantageous situation in answering this question because, kids will be bored if it's boring, right? If you're sitting, the Rebbe could be great, but if you're sitting in a class and you know all the material, it's boring. And kids need to be engaged and challenged. And it shouldn't, and it takes, I think, Simas Lev. I think it takes really just focus. And for the Rebbe, the teacher, the Mora, to recognize that Yankel, Bracha, he needs more, and therefore I will give him more. I'll give him, do this taisis at home. When I was an 8th grade Rebbe, I would call them, maybe through my basketball lens, I would call them alley-oops. I would be reading a Gemara, and I'm like, here, so I'm going to tell you over a kasha from Rabbi Chanan, a kasha of Rabbi Kiva. It won't be on the next test. So right away, I lose 30% of the class, right? Because Baruch Hashem is not on the test. I said, and it's an alley-oop, meaning I'm going to throw it. It's a very high pass. If you could jump, or if you want to jump, you can maybe catch it and slam it in. You don't have to jump. I used to always call them, I used to pause and I say alley-oop time. So first of all, it's cute, it's exciting, it's fun. And it perks up the mitzuyanim and the gifted. I don't like the word gifted, it makes you sound a little bit strange. But the mitzuyanim now get their little paperas, they get their sweets and their sugars. So do I think it's a school's responsibility to keep those kids engaged? Absolutely, 100%. That being said, as a parent, never rely on the school. You're supposed to push the school for everything, rely on them for nothing. If you have a son who's super bright, chances are he won't be getting everything in school. And when he comes home at night, the Gemara will be, he won't have to chazir the Gemara because he chazir it 3 times in yeshiva. Get him a chavrusa at night. Get him extracurricular. Get your daughter chess lessons because she's a big math brain. All of the above. But don't do is decide that your child is gifted when they don't think that or they don't want. Right? When you have that child who's bright, but is a 9, 10, 12, 13, and is not interested in all the, doesn't want to learn a new Masechta at night, you will lose the long game. If you say, well, but you're so bright, I'm going to throw more on you when the kid isn't ready for it.
True. Let me ask it this way, right, Schonfeld. Let me not push back, but
well, obviously, obviously, spelling bees, those are amazing for this.
Right.
And bees and competitions in yeshiva. Yeah, because they show the gifted. Yeah. Yes,
okay.
Yes.
What'd you say in America, in our Torah system, in our Haredi, whatever we are, yeshiva education system, what percentage of money is being allocated to special needs versus gifted? Like, how would you,
9 to 1.
Right. At least.
Yeah. Right.
Probably more
90-10. 90-10.
Right.
Yes.
At least. So would you say that's the way it should be? What is your comment on that? Is there a priority? I guess the way to rephrase it is should we be prioritizing one special needs population over another special needs? Because essentially what we're saying is if we're teaching the 50%, you have 10% of outliers on the right, 10% on the left, right? And then we're taking 90% of our extra, quote unquote, resources and putting them on the
50% in the middle. You realize your math. 50, I don't know where you were, but 50% in the middle, then 10% on the top, and 10% at the bottom.
No, there's others that could like hold on. I'm assuming the next percentage is not law. They're doing okay, even though you're in the middle. And then we're taking 90% of the resources and putting them on 10% bottom. Is that the way it should be? Maybe we should be splitting it 50-50. And how do you make that assessment?
I think, again, these are big questions, right?
That's why we have Rabbi Ari Schonfeld as the co-host of The Learning Curve.
For big questions, you get big answers. Brought to you by, So I think the way it works is that kids that are struggling academically, that are special needs on the bottom, educationally, the concern is that leads to other crises, right? And that if you don't support them, their self-esteem will get destroyed, their self-worth will get destroyed, they will suffer. They sometimes it comes with other challenges as well, emotional and social. And I think that is viewed as a crisis of a need that must be filled, as opposed to the top. Yes, of course, your son being bored is a problem, but I think, and I don't have the data to back this up, but I think my experience shows that the kids that are on the top, they feel better anyways. They kind of, even without all the beautiful helps that the yeshivas give them, there's a self-motivation that they carry because of their success, because of their brightness, because of their capability. They need less support because they can succeed anyways. Not that we shouldn't give them and shouldn't incentivize them and shouldn't try to push them, but I think the crisis is the struggling kid as opposed to the kid that we need to give more mesechtas for and more bekias and more math.
Even though one could argue that the top 10% impact on Klal Yisrael broadly could potentially be quite significant.
Yeah, I think that's playing God. I think to say that we have to take our money and not, because obviously we have a finite amount of money, and not give it to the struggling kid, and to say that I want to give it to the top because he's going to become, the next Rabbi Akiva Eger, the next Moshe Feinstein. I am curious if you would speak to or do it like a research data on Gedolim. Maybe find out when they were younger. I don't know if anyone could do such a thing. Try to find stories about when Gedolim were younger.
Coming soon by Art Scroll.
Yes.
We're allowed to plug our stuff.
I think you could plug our stuff.
So I'm proud to announce that a new book is coming out called When They Were Young, Stories of Our Gedolim as Children by none other than Yerachmiel Garfield. Coming soon to stores near you.
So I am assuming that there'll be a chapter in there and discussing when they were in elementary school, where they were elementary school Rebbeim that gave them so much that made them into these Gedolim. I think that most of a Gedolim, not that they're born Gedolim, but that there's a certain self-motivation that happens not because of our system. I don't think our system, and maybe I'm being too harsh, and the Rebbeim won't like this, and I was Rebbe for a long time. I don't think our system produces Gedolim. I think Gedolim produce Gedolim. I think our system helps hold the middle and those that need us. And if either we help, of course we give. I think the Gedolim, by and large, become Gedolim on their own.
Honestly, these are deep waters, as you mentioned, and I think it's fascinating. I think about this stuff. I don't have easy answers, and I hear your perspective, and I'm not sure that's the answer. I think, listen, how do we mavater on any kid for any reason, right? So, like, if a strong kid needs us, we need to be there for them, period, right? And if a weak kid needs us, we need to be there for them, period. And who could be
right?
mavater?
But using the muscle of strong, if you're in a gym and there's a kid that really has low muscle tone and struggling to walk, you're going to spend your resources to support him, as opposed to a kid that's an athlete and is very good but could become a bodybuilder. And let's even assume bodybuilding is a mila, right? It's something that we strive for. You're going to say, that's great. Hopefully get there on his own, and I'll try to incentivize him. But come on, this kid can't walk.
So I'll say it like this. I honestly am not sure. I'm not sure what Minhag Yisrael, what Gedolim say. I think there are different opinions about this. I really do. I'd be curious if anyone listening wants to share a marmukum from the last 30 years. Like going back, to Europe is not necessarily the most good comparison. But I'd be curious what Gedol Yisrael would say about it.
Would you agree with the following statement? I think there is a hashkafic machlekes. This is about Elef Nichnas, right, and B'yachad Yaitze, right? Having the 1,000 boys in the yeshiva for the one kid. See, to me, there's the theoretical and the practical. I think theoretically, this is a big machlekes among, when you sit down and hack about who's the yeshiva for. I think practically, 99.9% of yeshivas operate in this way, where the money is spent on the bottom. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Now a question for moi.
Yes. Dear TLC, I imagine this is for Rabbi Garfield more than Rabbi Schonfeld. Wow. It's a question about sports.
Right. I was going to say, either about camp or sports, 2 areas of my expertise.
As someone who grew up in town and now lives out of town, I am struggling with the wide range of hashkafas that families have in our school. How do I maintain our family values while not hurting the others in the class that are different?
This is a really important question, and one that every parent needs to ask. Obviously there are challenges of in town and challenges of out of town, and actually the challenges are the very brachas. For example, in town, right? Unbelievable. That's how Hashem made the world. It's always like in town, there's this inertia, there's this groupthink, there's a strong culture, and that sort of helps support your kids in their growth, right? But it also could affect individuality and the need for doing different things for different kids and this groupthink, which could be very damaging. And then out of town, because there is not that culture, parents, especially if they grew up with that, feel like, oh my gosh, who's going to get my kid to do the things I want if the whole class isn't? And it's this constant sort of concern that quote unquote in-town parents who live out of town have when they see their kids and they're like, if the whole class isn't doing it, or what's the cultural tone, very strong area of sensitivity. So what I would tell parents, I grew up out of town and I've lived out of town my whole life. I was a Rebbe in Atlanta. Now I live in Houston, grew up in Philadelphia. Like, no, yeah, no in town for me. So I'm very used to that individualistic kind of approach. And I think ultimately parents need to know.
Speak to the milas of that approach for yourself personally, how you, and I don't want to talk about your middle school years, but where you found that to be invigorating.
Well, for me, and again, if you look at my eighth grade class, there's quite a range of kids who went different ways. But what you definitely could find is almost to the fullest is that the kids ended up mostly aligned with their parents' values. Meaning parents that were chilled about Frumkeit, their kids are chilled about Frumkeit. And parents who were jived about Frumkeit, like my parents, their kids are jived about Frumkeit. And it might look a little different, but largely it's very similar, which is fascinating, right?
In Houston, you have a wide range. You have a koil, right? A pretty Baruch Hashem, a yeshivish, serious koil, and then you have the old Houston garb, right? My sister's in Houston, her husband's a Rav in Houston. I know a bunch of people in Houston. So you have a really there are communities where you live in the boondocks, and like they're there for Kirov, and then you're the one from kid or the one. You have such a wide range. Is that a challenge of people in Houston saying, let's split the schools? I'm not trying to create politics here, but but we
Listen,
want
there
our
are
own.
always different people who have different opinions, of course. But the great mila is there's a real sense of community here because the geographic makeup is that the yeshiva-oriented shuls, the yeshiva-oriented school, the kollel are all in a very small geographic area. So it creates a synergy between the community. And then we have a modern Orthodox school, shul, and community, and a Chabad school, shul, and community. And even though we're separate, but we're friendly, but within the individual communities, there's a lot of synergy, and that's a beautiful thing.
Is your answer to this mother, don't worry, if as long as you're a good parent, the values of the school, or that kid in the school who does X, Y, and Z, and parents allow him to go X, Y, don't worry.
I would say, always worry when it deals with kids and chinuch and mothers and fathers. Nothing, you just have to worry and daven. But ultimately, if you create a healthy culture that really, whatever culture, whatever ashkafa you have that you're true to, a lot of times, and I don't mean to be insulting to any parents in Houston or anywhere, but like they'll say, make my kid yeshivish, but they themselves are on legs, not coming to davening, not walking like a ben Torah. So like, it doesn't work like that. That is a non-option. It doesn't work. So if you want your kid to be whatever, a ben Torah, then you better be a ben Torah inside the house and outside the house. And so that does not work. Maybe in town it works. I don't know. You could speak to that because then you could have the inertia of the community. But out of town, that's not an option. If you're out of town and you want your kid to be a ben Torah, you need to live those values through and through. And if you do, Baruch Hashem, like I've seen great success. Not always because things happen, but generally it works. Yeah.
I want to add 2 points. One from Rabbi Lapiansky, and one a story that happened to me. I was at a Q&A with Rabbi Lapiansky, and someone asked him this question about living out of town, but I want certain kids not be accepting kids in the school. Maybe it was an administrator, or maybe it was at a Torah convention even. We don't want to accept certain kids because they don't fit. And Rabbi Aaron said, when you make a decision to move to an out-of-town community, part of the decision you're making is that you are accepting a class with different strands of Yiddishkeit and hashkafas that are not necessarily the same as yours. Otherwise, stay in the tri-state
Right.
area. When you move to Jacksonville, Florida, I'm making up a name, I don't know anything about Jacksonville, Florida, right? And there's one local yeshiva, for you to move there and then say, I'm not happy with the kid in the class, then don't move there. That's there, as you said, there are pros and cons to this, and don't give up on the chinuch, but that is what you are embracing, and you're embracing the milas, you're embracing the achdus and klal Yisrael, and respecting others that aren't like you, and maybe even have a positive effect on others. All of the milas that come with it is part of your decision by moving there. That was very
Yeah, I actually say that to people. If on an interview I sense they're asking a lot of questions about, how right wing we are and are we moving and how yeshivish, I say, listen, is the school and the community trending to the right? Absolutely. No question. And that's, I would say 100%. The world is trending to the right and Houston is very much trending to the right. However, be happy with what it is now, or you're just going to be frustrated. Like, do a full investigation, check our policies, find out if we have school on Thanksgiving or whatever is important to you, and then accept it or don't come. But don't come with the taina that. Yeah.
So, and I want to share a story because even though the person wrote, I imagine this is Rabbi Garfield, Muller, and Schonfeld, I actually disagree with that because Yeshiva Time in Manhattan really has an out-of-town flavor. It really, really does in the type of community we have. So I had the following story with a parent. I hope I didn't overstep in what I said. You'll be the judge, Rabbi Garfield. A mother called me upset that the kids in the class read Harry Potter. And it's inappropriate for kids to read. We should stop it. I said to the mother, I have to be honest. I have Harry Potter in my house. So I don't really see what you're afraid of. And she was not happy with me. And I said to her, I'm going to be honest, Mrs. Goldstein, if you're an Ari Yeshiva and you're upset about Harry Potter, that the kids in the class are reading Harry Potter, you should probably switch yeshivas. I said this to her because the story gets better. I said, because they're going to read. If you're expecting me to try to stop the boys from reading what I consider to be an okay outlet, I'm not going to. And I even suggested certain yeshivas. I said, why don't you apply to this and this yeshiva? It's a little further out. They're much more yeshivish than us. So she says to me, I want to. But because my husband grew up Modern Orthodox, even though now he's a flip out, they won't give us an interview because of his background. So I responded and said, Mrs. Goldstein, I'm just going to tell you my hashkafa. In my house, reading Harry Potter is a lot less treif than not giving an interview to someone because they have a Modern Orthodox.
Whoa. That's a good quote. We're going to make sure that quote is highlighted.
But that's a choice you make, meaning she really wants to go to that other yeshiva. She just can't get in.
See, that really would mess with a kid. That I'm just saying, I don't know her, but that's bad. So inconsistent.
Great family, great kid. She just has certain real sensitivities that she has that most of the rest of our yeshiva doesn't have. And that was my story with this different hashkafas.
All right. So wonderful. If anyone's interested in moving out of town, you know where to look. There are different communities that have different flavors also.
Yeshiva Katana of Manhattan is open for business.
You can live in Brooklyn and send your kids to the guest chinuch over there. Okay, wonderful. Now we're going to go on to the next topic and our guest speaker, which is Rabbi Yitzchak Feigenbaum. And we're going to talk about a very important issue. Now, Rabbi Schonfeld, should we read the question first or should we introduce Rabbi Feigenbaum first to our crowds?
Let's... Ooh. You know what? I'm going to let you decide. I make all the decisions.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to introduce Rabbi Feigenbaum because I'm such a big fan. I can't hold back. I love Rabbi Feigenbaum.
Should be a trivia question. The trivia question should be when, to our listeners, we should give out, a free copy of your new book. When Rabbi Feigenbaum was quoted on our podcast in season 1, when was he quoted?
Oh, yes. Very, very nice. Okay, so happened to be, it's funny you mentioned that because Rabbi Feigenbaum and me are also, there's about to be a first here on the learning curve, which is a crossover from the second best chinuch podcast to the first best chinuch podcast. I'm not going to say which is which.
You are out there today.
The listeners, they're going to have to figure it out. But I had Rabbi Feigenbaum wrote a beautiful, beautiful siddur, multiple siddurim at this point, called the Feigenbaum Siddur. And I met Rabbi Feigenbaum at a Torah Masor conference, and we talked. And then he was so gracious to come on my other podcast called the Chinuch Today, and we discussed it. It was a beautiful, beautiful interview, and I just fallen in love with Rabbi Feigenbaum. I've gone to shiurim of his, and I'll just say briefly a little about him. He was born in Cleveland, but he learned mostly in Eretz Yisrael, and that's another whole interesting side of him. He has smicha from Rebbeim Schonfeld in the mirror, and he actually, this is a little side fact people don't know, but he was the first mashkiach in the Eisha Torah in Eretz Yisrael. He was one of the first employees there, together with Rabbi Weinberg, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, and then he went to Darkei Noam and Chappelle's and started that. But he is most known for the many years he spent in Toronto in Tiferes Beis Yaakov, which is I guess at the time the new Beis Yaakov in Toronto, but now very much an established Beis Yaakov where he built it and was involved in chinuch there. But now he's in Eretz Yisrael doing training and writing and just continuing to spread the good word on chinuch. So, Rabbi Feigenbaum, I hope I did justice to all that.
That wasn't bad. That wasn't bad.
Is there anything I missed? Is there any talent or skill?
Didn't tell everybody how good looking I am, but otherwise,
Yes, they're just going to have to imagine that. They're going to have to imagine that for themselves. But anyway, Rabbi Feigenbaum, it's great to have you. I always love schmoozing with you and talking about chinuch. You're the real deal, as they say. You're the real
Well, that's
deal.
a huge compliment coming from Houston, Texas. Yes,
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to the learning curve. Okay, so we're talking about davening, an area you spent a little time thinking about. And I always think like davening for me, for boys, I always like equate it to tznius for girls. It's like the topic that somehow we cannot get right in the chinuch system, and somehow we do more damage than good. It's like the hardest things to give over. Like we want our girls to appreciate tznius, appreciate davening. We want our boys to appreciate davening. It's like we get them excited about learning. We've been doing good with that. They love learning. But davening is like the hardest topic.
It's interesting you say that. I would tell my alumni when they're in Shidduchim, and they would say, but it's funny, he's such a good boy, but he struggles getting to chakras on time. Like, I don't know so I use an exact line. I said, what tznius is to girls, a great girl, but his skirt's a little, I said, that's what tefillah b'tzibur is for boys. Same
Wow.
thing.
It's so true. So we want to talk about that. I know you've done an amazing thing for this in terms of your sitter to really try to make tefillah meaningful and connect to the kids. But like we want to go a little broader. But what we have is a question that a listener sent in. So Rabbi Schonfeld is going to read you the question and use it as a springboard to really understand tefillah.
The question is actually a specific question about how to deal with a teenage son in Shtiblach. So I'm going to ask you the question, and then if you obviously respond how you like, but I'd love to hear more. I bought your sitter. I almost bought it for my whole class. I didn't. It's expensive. No, it's beautiful.
We'll make you a deal. If you're a friend of Rabbi Garfield, we'll make you a deal.
If you could obviously your sitter to hear about would be amazing. So here's the question. I actually got this question from a friend of mine who davened at a local 9 o'clock minyan in Passaic with my bachrim, my children. And he's upset at me that I don't daven with my children sometimes on Shabbos. I daven earlier. And he said, you know what? I love Rabbi Garfield. I went to yeshiva with him. I'm sending you an email, and here it goes.
Oh, wow. That's good. Okay, now I'm interested.
Yeah, so I'm part of the question here. We daven at a serious, growth-oriented shul with a strong Rav. My newly bar mitzvah son dislikes it and prefers a more relaxed shtibel minyan that starts at 9 and sometimes misses man Kriya Shema. In parentheses, though I am not sure when he actually arrives. Should I keep davening at my shul or join them to stay involved and ensure he's davening properly? And what about my younger kids who are still getting trained in proper shul habits? Do I stay in my shul for their chinuch? How do I balance between my children? So this is not a question about, it is. It encompasses everything. I know, the floor is yours, Rabbi.
Well, I have one shaila. Why does he assume that his bar mitzvah boy son will daven better if he joins him at that 9 o'clock minyan? Maybe his son will actually daven better if his father Dafka says, I trust you, have a good time, I'll see you when you come home for chult, and leave the dumb kid alone, right? Same story with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. Somebody asked Rabbi Yaakov, he said, Rebbe said, at what age do you bring your children, do you take your children to shul? You know what his answer was? Never. Never. You never take your children to shul. When they want to come to shul, then they come with you. You don't take your children to shul.
So I'll add to the shaila, because this person said to me, when he let me know, he said, I want you to know, just to kind of Rabbi Feigenbaum push back on what you just said. He said, he was trying to be nice to me. He said, your children, Baruch Hashem, daven beautifully. That's what he said to me. But most of the teenage bachrim are in the back schmoozing. And his assumption is, had their fathers have been there, they would not be.
You know what the rule is? If a kid has a father who tells him to daven, he'll raise children who he will tell to daven. If he has a father who davens, the kids will daven. If you think a kid davens better because a prison warden is sitting next to him going, no, 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 right? That ain't going to help. He'll read the words, and the father can say, look at my boy, but he's going to develop what I call in my sitter, PTSD, right? You know what PTSD, right? PTSD is post-traumatic sitter disorder. Right? When he sees a sitter, he'll freeze, right? And as soon as he's out of here, he will find the 11:30 minyan and show up for Kiddush once he's old enough to do it on his own, right? Davening is not saying words, right? Davening is connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I have two boys. They're married with children, and they have children there, so, right? Kanan, they're older. But when they were teenagers, they're 11 months apart. Night and day difference. The older one loved davening. He got to shul before I did. He was a masbid, that kid that everybody loves. The second one was a kvad peh and disliked davening. He didn't that right. I used to tell him on Shabbos morning, all I ask you to do is get to shul in time so we could walk home together. I don't even want to know where you are, right? Stand in the back. I just want to walk home with you back together with shul. His older brother said, Ty, you got to force him to go to davening. I said, I'll die. You'll be his father. Until then, I'm his father, right? Of course, when he got older and flipped out, he said, why did you force me to go to shul? I said, you're a lunatic. You wouldn't be from today if I would have done that, right? Le'elam yilmad adam. You have to learn what you like and where you like. Same thing with davening, different flavors, different styles. You can force him to say words. You can't force him to daven.
So what do we do? I hear you saying what not to do. We shouldn't harass him. We shouldn't new him. We shouldn't mutcha him. That's all what we shouldn't do. Okay, which of course we all do. But let's start with that. So let's say we're not doing that. What do we do?
As an institution, as a yeshiva in school, or as a father with your kid at home? Well, Tiferes Beis Yaakov High School in Toronto, at least, I don't know what it does now, and it's doing Baruch just fine without me, right? Can I know how, right? As I said, Beis Elam is full of irreplaceable people, right?
It's not as much fun, I can tell you. Whatever it is, it's not as much fun.
But I'll tell you what we did with the girls for davening. So you got a room full of girls, 100 girls, 120 girls. They're not all davening. First dates, right? They're not interested. They're bored. They don't daven. They're angry at Hashem. Whatever it is, they're not all davening. So there was davening, and you had two choices. Either you're in the main hall, the main auditorium for davening, or we had what was called davening workshop. And you had to go to one of the two. If you were davening, then you're davening. You can't daven, don't talk and get in trouble. Go to davening workshop. And we had a cool teacher, and they learned about davening. They learned Percha Milos. They discussed davening. They did small little parts, sort of like Esha Torah, beginner's minion. What did that do for our name? I didn't care, right? The yesod is that the students aren't there for the success of the Misa. The Misa is there for the success of the students, right? So my purpose was to help the students.
What was the percentage participation?
So in the beginning, I would say maybe if we had like 100, when we had 100, 120 girls in the school, maybe 10%, right? 10, 12 girls, right? And so in the beginning, everybody davened together for Elul, so we could spot the non-daveners, right? And we could see what was going on. We then suggested to some girls, you'll get into a lot less trouble by going, right? Other defaults, pasnich. I said, but you're not davening, right? And then some volunteered. But by and large, as 9th grade, 10th grade, the goal was to move them back in, and they all moved back. They all slowly but surely moved back in.
Would you suggest this for boys who obviously have Daba the Minyan and this Kriyas HaTorah?
That I'm not a Rav. It's obviously easier to do with girls, right? But for politics and looks aside, if you're asking in a pure halachic shaila, you need to ask a paisek. I'm nowhere near a paisek. When I was a menahel, I paid someone else to teach halacha, right? My job was to convince people to keep it, not to tell you what it is. So that's a good shaila. I can't answer that.
You could invoke the famous rule about Shabbos, right? Mutav shichal Shabbos achas.
So that you have to ask. Every school has its paisek and vada rabbanim. On an individual level, depending on the age of the kid, when they're bribable, bribe them, right? I bribed my kid to daven Meyer, right? I offered them all sorts of incentives to go. What did you learn from that? I don't get it. But Tati obviously thinks it's really important because that's what he's willing to do just for me to go down Maariv. So he hopped that it's important even though he didn't get it. That's how you do with little kids. When you're a little kid regarding tefillah, sit down and talk to him. Explain to him. Why is he not davening? Is he dyslexic? Can he not read the Hebrew? Does he not understand it? Buy him my sitter. Buy him my sitter. I don't mean to plug this, but I do because even though I'm really not a self-promoter, but thousands and thousands of people have transformed their davening, right? Through it, adults and kids and teens of all ages. Buy him my sitter and say, just go to shul. I don't care what you do with the sitter. Read the back, which answers all the questions. Read the things on the side. Don't daven. I don't care. Just sit in shul and sit for a half hour with the sitter and read it, and he will.
I want to get into the sitter of what caused you to write it, of what you think its tachlis is. But I just want to go back to that quote that in season 1, which I'm sure you heard because you hear all our episodes, as all our listeners do. But Rabbi Garfield quoted you. Rabbi, do you remember the quote? I think, no? In which he quoted this. I think he said, I met a Yid 20 years ago at Torah Sarga mentioned, a special Yid. His name is Rabbi Feigenbaum, who said that tefillah, maybe I'm paraphrasing, is like a midah.
Oh, yes. That's true. That's in the introduction to the Siddur. Meaning, just like there are kids who naturally are really good at doing chesed, and they have good people skills, and they love visiting, people in the old age home, and they know how to schmooze, and other people, they freeze, they can't do it, get me out of here, smells, I don't like old people, right? Same thing. Some people are natural daveners. They know how to talk to themselves. They know how to talk to Kodesh Baruch Hu. They're comfortable with themselves. They just blurt out what's on their mind. They don't have a problem. Other people are just not in touch with themselves and have a hard time talking. They don't know what to say and how to say, and they feel stupid saying, and davening will always be difficult for them. You need to know that about your kid, right? Besides the fact that whether maybe he just can't read Hebrew so well, and maybe he's angry at a Kodesh Baruch Hu because his bubby is dying, and he thinks that stinks, right? So
I don't know, but in terms of reading so well, sometimes there are kids that I think read well because they daven for the Amud in 8th grade. You hear them davening, and they know it perfectly until they get to Chazar Sashat perfectly. Ladar Vadar. They mess up Ladar Vadar because everything else they know by heart. They don't know by heart. And then you find out, oh my goodness, this kid can't read Hebrew.
Now, I tell kids to daven in English. If the Hebrew is meaningless to you, daven in English, 100%. Say Shema Yisrael in Hebrew, do the rest in English. I might be wrong. It is Lashon HaKodesh, and there's a lot of power to it, but davening is communicating with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's what davening is. You're communicating with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. You're not saying words. If your skirt is below your 4 inches below your knee, you're tsanua. If the tefillin is on your hand, you did tefillin. If you ate the masa, you ate the masa. Reading a bunch of words, which you're just doing just to get done with, that wasn't tefillah. It wasn't a avodah shabalev. You didn't do anything. So what did you accomplish?
Right. Yeah, Reb Chaim Brisker says that the tznius when asked, you have to be emel l'fnei melech. If you're not emel l'fnei melech, there's Moshe Nesser. So right. So talk about your siddur and how it evolved and
how it evolved. That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure how it evolved. I think it started it started with really the vidui. I have a vidui pamphlet out that's been out for tons of years because I was when I was a Menahel, I also taught all the grades. I was a teaching principal. I had a lot of people under me that did administration. So when I taught, during Elul, 1 year I was teaching the vidui. What does it mean? What does Hashabnu mean? Hashabnu out that. And so I said to write it out in English so girls would have something to say. Just, I'm guilty. The words were meaningless. So I did a lot of research, Vida V'chaim Vital, and I started with that. And then they said, help us with the Rosh Hashanah davening. So I made a little thing. I took some of the key paragraphs, and I started translating it into I looked at all the translations and I realized I, who grew up in the 60s and had a good English education, didn't understand the English completely. So Kal v'chomer today. So I rewrote it myself, and the girls were so taken with it. I was so surprised that I just said, why don't you make a siddur? Why don't you? And so I started writing. I have to give Hakar Satov to Mosaic Press, who pushed me forward with it when I came up with my original manuscript. Original, I was just doing the English. It's like a siddur companion. I had the questions. They said, why don't you just make it a siddur? It was really their idea. Put it all together and make it a davenable siddur. And really, that's where it came from. They helped me out a lot with the setup, which works, like with the questions on the side, but the answers in the back so the kid sees the question. And I remember I taught Hashkaf in my school for years, and the questions in the siddur are the questions that everybody just asked as we went along. They're all questions that kids thought of, and I just wrote them down and said, that's a good question. I'll get back to you next week. And over the years, I refined the answers till it became in the siddur because they're obvious questions. So what am I asking Hashem for? He gives me everything, but actually he does it, right? And how you say Birchas HaShachar when your life is falling apart, right? So it was their questions. And then I started writing, and I passed it around. I took papers and I passed it to kids to see, does it make sense? Do you understand what I'm talking about? And it was like 3-4 years till I finally sort of got it down in order to create a translation that kids would understand. Somebody asked me what the hardest part was. I spent most of my time on the online thesaurus trying to find simple words that I knew teens would understand. In the original editing, they would rewrite things, and I said, that's great, but there's not a 15-year-old on the planet in the frum world that would know what those words mean. And that's what we worked really hard on, was just, and I would test that out. I would test out sentences on teens, on my grandchildren, just to say, do you know what that means? And they said, no. I said, okay, well, let's try to say it a different way, right? And It's just crazy siyata d'shmaya. I never thought it would go over like it did. And I never thought adults would use it like they do.
Do you think davening in schools should be shorter in the younger grades? Like, meaning if it sounds to me like you think the anecdote for the making davening meaningful is to translate, explain, etc. So, we have a half an hour in our school for davening. So if you want to do a lot of davening in third, fourth grade, you gotta chant it out, essentially. Now there's a value to that because you become fluent in the words by chanting it out, right? But on the other hand, it's very rote. How would you balance that in the younger grades?
It's very rote, but that's how they learn how to say it.
Right. So maybe you should do it then. I'm just saying, but it's not a meaningful experience. It's like embedded. It's like the first experience is not so meaningful. It's just how it's how it is. How is that, Ari? Was that a good
Amish nosach. That wasn't davening nosach, right?
Right. I don't know. I've never did third, fourth grade. I don't know how davening goes. Why don't you, before davening starts, say, okay, before we start davening, right? I want everybody, we're going to say Moida. Everybody says, say Moida Ani to yourself, even if you already said it at home. And then quietly think to yourself something you want to thank Hashem for today.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's
I
beautiful.
picked that up from the Manchester. He said he does it, and I want to know for the last 20 years I've been doing it. And at my age, you know what I say? Thank God I'm 75. I can get myself dressed. Thank you, Hashem. I say, Moidani, thank you that I can get myself dressed. Thank you, I can go to the washroom. Thank you that I was able to give a shiur last night and I made sense. Tell the kids to do that and then let them daven. And maybe at the end, do the same thing.
Beautiful.
So they should get used to talking. And then at the end, say, before we leave, everybody think of one thing you want to ask Hashem for help today. You have a test, you have something going on, just in your head, get them to do that.
So if a parent comes to you and says, Ma'am, I see your siddur, it's wonderful. Obviously, that means that tefillah is dear and near to your heart. I have a son, a daughter, 8th grade, 9th grade, and it's not because they have a hard time waking up in the morning. It's a separate sugya. Davening just doesn't speak to them. They find it boring. They find it meaningless. It's not even so much that they're angry hashkafic. They don't have deep hashkafic. What's the point? They just doesn't speak to them. How can I help my child? And as a Rebbe, the same question, help my Talmud, make davening more meaningful for them.
This is going to sound self-serving, but I apologize, but it works based on the hundreds of emails that I got. Buy the kid the siddur and say, I'm giving this to you as a gift. They'll roll their eyes. I can send you emails from Mechanchim who said, I bought your siddur. I gave it to my teenage daughter. She rolled her eyes and said, that's my birthday present? She said, yeah. So she put it down. And I didn't say a word. A week later, I found it next to her bed. 2 weeks later, I didn't see it around. I said, where's the siddur? She said, oh, I brought it to school. I use it every day. And don't ask it, and don't ever ask them if they daven. Don't ask them if they opened it. Don't ask them anything. Just leave them alone and say, here's a gift for you. Maybe this will help. Do with it as you may. They'll start opening it. They'll start reading it. They'll daven in English. They'll say one thing. It takes time. And the other suggestion is, as I say, you don't like davening, but I can't tell you what to do. On your way to school, talk to yourself. In today's day and age, you can walk to the streets and talk to yourself. It doesn't look weird. And just say, hi, good morning, Hashem. This is Sprinza talking. Oh, but I guess you know that. I have a big math test today. Could you help me out? Hi, this is Ari. Thank you very much. Here, get them used to talking to Hashem. That'll make a difference. Beautiful.
Beautiful. Do you think that we're going in the right direction or the wrong direction? I don't know if you have a perspective. I know you live in Harnov. Okay, Senator. But I feel like in America, at least, davening is in a worse place. Davening b'tzibur is in a worse place for kids 20 and under than it's ever been. Rabbi Schonfeld, do you have a thought about that?
You asked me to compare to what it was 20 years ago?
Yeah, I just
don't
feel
know.
like kids are just not, a lot of them don't come. We stand in the back.
Rabbi Garfield, am I older than you? No, right? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so, but I'm not that much younger than him than it looks like, even with all my white hairs.
What's going on in Passaic?
So you want to know, is the 930 minyan in the Avas and Passaic Bein Azmanim pumping? Yes. But so is the 845 minyan in my shul that has a Bein Azmanim afterwards, for a Seder with a good breakfast. I don't know that it's better or worse. I know that it is. I loved your mashal in the beginning, Rabbi Garfield. I know that tefillah, like the topic or the subject in elementary school that Rebbeim struggle with the most in middle school is teaching Chumash. Because once you get to Gemara and you use a kaiches for teaching teaching Chumash Rashi, every year is a tumult and a sugya. How do we teach Chumash in a meaningful way? I think, globally, tefillah is something that we, maybe because it's so personal and it's not an academic pursuit necessarily, we don't have a roadmap, an atlas to that kid. It's in elementary schools, it's just by rote. We sing Ashrei, we sing songs, we try to make it a little bit exciting, and the kids come on time and a hallel. I even not complained. I asked my Rebbeim and said, hey, maybe change up the songs once a month to make it less by rote, and they did not appreciate it. I have my system, all of them. No, this is how we sing Ashrei. I'm going to change my songs. I finally got the kid to know Ashrei. Now I'm going to teach him a different niggin. This is something that we don't have a great handle on, or from a communal level of how to inspire a kid in tefillah who is, and in other words, the kid in 5th or 6th grade, 7th grade who struggles in tefillah. It's not us that's able to reach him through tefillah, I find.
Because tefillah is a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. You can't create a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu if you don't know how to create a relationship with other people. And you can't create a relationship with other people if you don't know how to create a relationship with yourself. And in today's day and age of huge confusion, kids are struggling more and more to have a honest and healthy relationship with themselves. And therefore, they're happy to do the words. We've created, Yiddishkeit Bechlal has become extraordinarily external, right? What's what Aaron Feldman said many years ago at a Torah Masorah convention. We're raising a generation of young people who are very observant, but they're not religious. They're very observant, but they're not religious. Right? Rav David Valley said tights in the pasuk. He says, "Hinei yamim ba'nim b'achri say yamim l'rov alechem aleitzam b'mayim kim l'shemayis divrei Hashem." He teichin l'rov lechem is mitzvos. There'll be plenty of mitzvos. L'sham b'mayim a mayim will be plenty of Torah, but no one's talking about a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Right? What's the one topic nobody talks about? Hashem. Right? You know the sugis, you know the raid, you know the halachas, you're doing everything right. You're not going to go to Gehenna. But to create a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu is very difficult. That's why I said in the younger grades, it's right, have them talk to Hashem before they daven. Have them talk to Hashem after they daven. Let everybody write a note what they were asking Hashem for and put it in a jar. Switch it up every month. And make him real. You're really asking Hashem for something. He's your tati. He's going to, right?
A while back, I asked you, I know what we shouldn't do, but what should we do? And you said in school or at home. So we've been talking mostly about school. Let's pivot a little and talk about home. So what message do you have to parents of kids who are, let's say, 8 to 12? Okay, that's when they're first experiencing tefillah. So you shouldn't force them to come to shul. You shouldn't tell them to be quiet. You shouldn't force them to do anything except give them your sitter, Mirza Hashem, at least one for home and one for shul. But, what else should a parent be doing positively, proactively?
So I assume when we're talking at home, so either we're talking during vacation, because he's between 8 and 12, he's davening in school, right? Or Shabbos, or let's say Sunday for girls, or Sunday if the boys don't have, depending on where they are, right? The worst thing you can do is scream at the kid. That's the worst thing you can do. Then they will guilt by association, right? Then tefillah is something that gets you screamed at, right? And you daven just to avoid getting screamed at. Caller ID motivation. Caller ID. What's the purpose of caller ID? To avoid uncomfortable situation. They'll just want to avoid uncomfortable situations, right? What can you do? Bribe 8, 9, 10. Make a chart. You daven and don't watch them daven. Don't look at them. Just say, go to the room, and then you daven, and the kid says yes, put a star in the chart. He did it. Doesn't matter. He'll feel guilty that he lied to his parents at some point, right? Doesn't matter. Write a chart. After 5 stars, you get whatever it is. Younger grades, you can just bribe them. It shows them how important it is. You want to show them that to you it's important, and I know it's hard. Just daven whatever you can. Daven just take a sitter, whatever you want to daven. You tell me, if you felt you daven, I'll give you a star, right? What else can you get them? Just don't whine. And the truth is given, my sitter, right? And just say, here it is. Open it, don't open it, right? Look at it for 5 minutes, and we'll call it being yaitz and davening. What else would you like to do? Stand there and say, you're not moving out of this room till you finish it. That's right. Once did a thing. I asked the girls once, how many girls ever saw their mothers daven? So their mothers daven, but they probably daven when everybody's left the house. I said, They see you love davening. They see you getting out on time. You are in shul, and they see you talking during davening. Goodbye, Charlie. You just lost it, man. You lost the battle. Out. It's out. You're gone.
I had an 8th grader once that was during Kedusha, one of my Talmidim, was talking and like didn't have his feet together. So my manal came over to me and he was like, Schonfeld. He was like munning me. Like a kid in class whose feet not together during Kedusha. Like, how could you have to work on him? So I said, Rabbi, so in my manal, I said, a boy in 8th grade who doesn't know to stand with his feet together by Kedusha, it means he never went to shul on Shabbos, which means him and his father have, right? Never. So then that boy is not someone that I could reach in tefillah. That boy means his family dynamic. It means they're not going to shul on Shabbos in his family. And because boy was bar mitzvah, he wasn't 10. So then what do you want from me? Call his father and tell him he has to start going to shul on Shabbos. And the father has to start going to shul on Shabbos.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Feigenbaum. Is there anything else about tefillah you feel that we should cover? I feel like we've done a pretty good job of understanding the issue, some potential areas that we could work on, things to avoid.
You know what I want everybody to know? When I give shiurim on tefillah, I'll do Yom Iyun here in Eretz Yisrael and seminaries and yeshivas that people ask me to speak. You know how I start? I start by saying, how many people in this room found themselves taking 3 steps backwards and saying, oh my gosh, I guess I must have just finished Shmona Esrei. Everybody smiles and raises their hand, and I raise my hand too. And I say, you know what, everybody? Rabbi Feigenbaum of the Feigenbaum Sitter sometimes just spaces out. Your kids have to know that it's not easy. Your kids have to know that you mess up, right?
Wow.
Parents have to make them realize, you have to make your kids realize it is talking not easy. It's not always easy for me. I don't always daven with kavanah. I got stuff on my head. Sometimes I'm upset with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. I find it hard to do it, right? I know that it's hard, but as long as you talk to Kadosh Baruch Hu, he's always listening.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi Feigenbaum. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it was a pleasure. You should have a huge amount of hatzlacha. We leave Chutz La'aretz in the good hands of you two Chashuv Rabbanim.
That was fun. Wow. We should all have such simchas achayim and chiyos, when we get a little bit older.
I don't want to say cute. That's not the right word. He's b'chein the guy. He has such a chain. Yeah.
You reminded me of when he spoke about the fact that we all struggle in tefillah and space out. A cousin of mine once told me, Eilev arechev. If a guy wants an umas ha'olam want to go on vacation, they need a rechev, they need a sus, they need transportation, they need a plane. If we want to travel, Shem Hashem lakeim naskir. You start davening, you're in Cancun, you're in LA, you're in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah. I'll tell you something I was thinking, and I don't know if this is true, but it's just coming to mind. Like, what is it about tznius and tefillah? It's funny because he also had that mashal. I think it's because those are things that are so deep and private inside of a person, but they're so easy to publicly monitor. So the differential, like tznius, you can't hide if you're not dressing tznius, right? You get nailed right away and everyone can see it. But yet it must reflect a deep, and also a davening. It's so easy to like force a kid to sit. Like, you go to some of these schools. I once went to a school for davening, no smiles. They have a Rebbe watching everyone like a hawk, no movement. It's like so easy to control, but it requires, and that differential between external and internal, since it's so great, it creates like a resentment and a resistance. Oh, that's just my thought. And we have to, it really goes back to something we've talked about a lot. The idea of control is not chinuch, and we have to always remember that. So easy to fall into that trap where you think, well, if I could scare the kid into davening or dressing tznius, then I've somehow changed their behavior.
So it turns out from today's podcast that if you have a gifted child who lives out of town and struggles with tefillah, we're able to help you.
I hope. Yeah.
All right. This was wonderful.
Now it's my big job to share the reach out. Of course, we love all the comments that we get. We've been getting more and more, thank God, more and more interest and traction, I guess is the right word, in podcast lingo. So please feel free to reach out to us. The email is thelearningcurve@mishpacha.com. Again, that's thelearningcurve@mishpacha.com. We love to hear you opine on some of the great matters we've discussed. Share our makaimas and send us additional questions. And wishing everyone a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us.